Close your eyes for a moment. Now imagine tomorrow morning every road disappears, every bridge is underwater, every trail you know has been washed away. You still have to feed your family. You still have to survive. That was reality for countless generations of ancient humans every rainy season. They had no forecasts, no maps, and no way of knowing when the storms would end. So why didn't rain wipe them out? The answer reveals just how remarkably adaptable our ancestors really were. For you, rain means finding an umbrella or checking tomorrow's forecast. For an ancient human, rain changed every decision they made before the day was over. Where to walk, where to sleep, which animals to follow, whether to eat now or wait, whether the people beside you would still be alive by the next sunrise. Because rain didn't attack humans directly, it quietly dismantled everything they depended on. A single afternoon of heavy rain could erase footprints that hunters had followed for hours. It could swell a peaceful stream into a river impossible to cross. It could hide dangerous predators behind curtains of water while washing away the scent that normally warned people they were nearby. The landscape itself became unfamiliar, and yet humans kept returning to places where this happened every single year. Not because they had no choice, because they learned that surviving rain meant understanding the land better than almost any other animal. That story begins with something most people never notice: the ground beneath your feet. Today, if rain starts falling, roads still exist. Bridges remain where they were yesterday. Buildings stay exactly where you left them. Ancient landscapes behave differently. After several days of rain, entire valleys transformed. Small creeks became rivers. Open grasslands became marshes. Animal trails disappeared beneath shallow water. What looked like solid ground in the morning could become knee-deep mud before evening. To someone unfamiliar with the land, everything looked the same. To experienced hunter-gatherers, it looked completely different. Anthropologists studying traditional foraging societies have noticed something remarkable. Skilled trackers rarely focus only on animals. They memorize landscapes with extraordinary precision. A particular tree bent toward the east, a ridge that always stayed dry, a patch of stones where water never collected. These details became maps that survived even when every footprint vanished. Rain erased tracks. It couldn't erase memory. That ability may sound ordinary. It wasn't. Modern neuroscience suggests the human brain contains specialized systems dedicated to building mental maps of the environment. Long before written directions or printed maps existed, people carried entire landscapes inside their minds. Your ancestors weren't wandering through wilderness. They were navigating neighborhoods. Every hill had a personality. Every stream behaved differently after storms. Every season changed the safest route home. Children didn't learn these places from books. They learned by walking beside older generations, year after year, until the landscape became as familiar as the rooms inside your own house. But knowing where to walk solved only half the problem. The harder question was knowing where not to stay. Most people imagine ancient shelters as permanent homes. For hundreds of thousands of years, they usually weren't. Many hunter-gatherer camps existed only for days or weeks before people moved again. That meant every new campsite required an important decision, not where life looked comfortable, where tomorrow's rain would cause the fewest problems. Archaeological excavations across Europe, Africa, and Australia reveal that prehistoric camps repeatedly appear on gentle rises instead of valley floors. At first glance, the difference seems insignificant until the rain comes. Water always searches for the lowest ground. A campsite only a few meters higher could remain relatively dry, while another, almost identical location slowly filled with cold standing water. This wasn't luck. It was accumulated knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Some families probably returned to the same elevated campsites for centuries because they already knew exactly how those places behaved during storms. In a strange way, rainfall created invisible landmarks. Not places you noticed during sunshine, places you remembered when everything else flooded. Rain also transformed another relationship that humans depended on: their relationship with animals. When modern people imagine hunting, they often picture following footprints across dry soil. Heavy rain made that almost impossible. Fresh tracks disappeared within minutes. Scents washed away. Broken branches sagged back into place. The forest became frustratingly quiet. So ancient hunters adapted by paying attention to something much larger than individual footprints: movement. Large herbivores rarely stayed in flooded lowlands for long. Deer climbed toward higher forests. Wild cattle searched for firmer ground. Even insects shifted where they gathered. Instead of asking, "Where did this one animal go?" hunters learned to ask, Where would every animal want to be after 3 days of rain? That question changed everything. Rather than chasing disappearing evidence, they predicted behavior. In many ways, they were studying ecology thousands of years before ecology existed as a science. They recognized patterns because their lives depended on recognizing them. If the marsh flooded, birds would gather elsewhere. If the river overflowed, grazing animals would avoid certain valleys. If insects exploded after rainfall, fish would become more active downstream. Rain wasn't just weather, it reorganized entire ecosystems. The people who survived were those who learned to read those changes almost automatically. Perhaps this explains something surprising about our own species. Humans became exceptional pattern seekers. Our brains constantly search for connections, often without us realizing it. Sometimes we see patterns that aren't there, but this tendency almost certainly offered enormous advantages to people whose survival depended on predicting what the next storm would change. Then something even stranger happened. After enough generations, rain stopped being viewed only as a threat. It became a signal, a season that announced opportunity. Because while storms made hunting harder in some places, they made food easier to find in others. And that's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The same rain that could destroy a camp could also fill forests, rivers, and wetlands with more life than they had seen all year. The first instinct during endless rain is to wait. Stay dry. Conserve energy. Hope tomorrow looks better. Your ancestors couldn't afford that luxury. Rain didn't pause hunger. Children still needed to eat. Fires still needed fuel. Muscles still needed calories. Every extra day spent hiding inside a shelter meant supplies slowly disappearing. So instead of treating storms as lost time, ancient humans learned something unexpected. Some of the best food appeared because of the rain. Think about what happens after a heavy storm today. Puddles form overnight. Plants suddenly look greener. Earthworms appear on sidewalks. Birds become louder. The natural world wakes up. That same pattern existed tens of thousands of years ago, only on a much larger scale. Rain transformed entire ecosystems almost overnight. Dry riverbeds filled with fish. Temporary ponds appeared where there had been nothing the week before. Fresh shoots pushed through the soil. Mushrooms emerged across forest floors within days. Animals that had been scattered across miles of dry landscape suddenly gathered wherever fresh vegetation exploded into life. For experienced hunter-gatherers, this wasn't chaos, it was opportunity. Modern researchers studying traditional foraging societies have repeatedly found that people don't simply collect whatever food happens to be nearby. They understand seasonal calendars that exist entirely inside nature itself. Not calendars with numbers, calendars made of flowers blooming, insects emerging, rivers rising, birds arriving, and trees producing fruit. Rain was one of the biggest signals in that calendar. A single week of storms could completely rearrange where food could be found. Instead of wandering randomly, people already knew what would happen next. If the first major rains arrived, certain routes became easier to dig because the ground softened. If wetlands flooded, edible water plants became accessible by canoe or simple rafts. If fruit trees received enough rain, animals would soon gather beneath them. One event triggered another, then another, then another. The landscape behaved like a chain reaction. This is one reason ancient humans spent so much time observing rather than rushing. The person paying attention often found food before the strongest hunter did. Rain also made something else surprisingly valuable: wood. Not for building, for understanding time. At first that sounds strange. After all, wet wood doesn't burn well. But ancient people learned there was an enormous difference between wood lying on the forest floor and wood still attached to living trees. Dead branches hanging above the ground often stayed much drier than fallen branches buried beneath wet leaves. Some species naturally resisted moisture better than others. Hardwoods dried differently than softwoods. Certain trees developed resin that caught fire surprisingly well, even after days of rain. Without chemistry textbooks or laboratory experiments, people slowly built generations of practical knowledge. Not every tree became firewood. Some became emergency firewood. Others became shelter poles. Others became digging sticks. A forest wasn't simply a collection of trees. It was a library. Each species solved a different survival problem, and every generation added another page to that library. Rain also forced people much closer together. Modern life gives us privacy almost everywhere. Ancient storms did the opposite. When the weather turned bad, families, relatives, and neighboring groups often shared whatever protected space they could find. Hours stretched into days. Days sometimes stretched into weeks. Imagine spending nearly every waking hour surrounded by the same people while rain hammered the roof without stopping. Arguments would happen, but so would something else: knowledge. Anthropologists have long noticed that hunter-gatherer societies rely heavily on spoken teaching rather than written instruction. Storms created perfect classrooms. Children listened while adults repaired clothing. Teenagers learned which plants became poisonous after flooding. Older hunters explained why certain valleys should never be entered after continuous rain. Grandparents remembered floods from decades earlier that younger people had never witnessed. Every story contained practical information hidden inside it. Today we call many of these stories myths or folklore. Originally, they may have been survival manuals. A tale about dangerous spirits living beside a river could easily protect children from powerful flood currents. A legend about sacred trees might preserve the only grove that remained dry during the rainy season. The story stayed memorable. The lesson stayed alive. Knowledge survived because people wanted to hear the story again. Rain also encouraged one of humanity's greatest inventions. Not a weapon, not a shelter, not even fire. Planning. Imagine watching dark clouds gather on the horizon. Do you eat all your food today, or save some for tomorrow? Do you continue hunting, or spend the afternoon repairing clothing before everything becomes soaked? Do you cross the river now, or accept being trapped for another week? Every decision required imagining a future that had not happened yet. Evolutionary psychologists believe this ability to mentally simulate tomorrow became one of humanity's greatest advantages. Rain rewarded people who prepared before they absolutely had to. That habit slowly became part of being human itself. Even today, you probably pack an umbrella because the forecast predicts rain. You buy extra food before a storm. You charge your phone before the electricity goes out. Those behaviors may seem modern. The instinct behind them is ancient. Your ancestors rehearsed tomorrow inside their minds thousands of generations before weather forecasts existed. But there was one challenge rain created that planning alone couldn't solve: disease. Standing water attracted insects. Wet clothing softened skin until small cuts became infected. Food spoiled faster. Parasites spread more easily through muddy camps. Unlike predators, these dangers couldn't always be seen. They arrived quietly. One bite, one infected wound, one contaminated pool. Entire families understood that some places simply became dangerous after prolonged rain. Modern archaeology cannot always reveal exactly how people understood disease before science, but it does show repeated movement. Groups abandoned camps, returned later, abandoned them again. Many researchers believe this pattern wasn't random. People noticed which places repeatedly made them sick. Even without understanding bacteria or parasites, experience taught them which environments should be avoided. Human beings have always been excellent at recognizing consequences, long before understanding causes. Eventually, something remarkable happened. Instead of constantly adapting to rain, some societies began organizing their entire lives around it. Not because storms became less dangerous, because predictable rainfall created something even more valuable than survival: reliability. The same rivers flooded every year, the same grasslands turned green, the same fishing grounds filled again. Generation after generation, people returned to those places because the rain itself became dependable. Without realizing it, they were taking the first small steps towards something humanity had never experienced before: staying in one place. And that simple decision would eventually transform hunter-gatherers into farmers, villages into cities, and seasonal camps into civilizations. But that story begins after the rain finally stops.